Elaine Frazier, 43 years old. For 3 months, she had lived as a ghost in someone else's apartment, unable to face the house that held her greatest failure. The guilt had become a second skin, tight and suffocating. But today, standing on the cracked concrete of her driveway, she had finally run out of places to hide. The house looked smaller than she remembered. Gray siding peeling at the corners, dead leaves piled against the foundation, the kind of decay that happens when no one's watching. Elaine's hand trembled as she pulled the key from her jacket pocket. The metal felt foreign, almost accusatory. She took a breath that didn't quite fill her lungs and stepped toward the front door. That's when she noticed the scratches. Deep gouges in the wood, clustered around the doorframe. Vertical lines that looked almost deliberate, almost desperate. Elaine's throat tightened. She leaned closer, her pulse hammering in her ears. The scratches weren't random. They were patterns of motion, repeated over and over until the paint had peeled away and the wood beneath had splintered. Her hands shook harder now as she fitted the key into the lock. The mechanism resisted, corroded from months of disuse, then gave way with a grinding click that echoed too loud in the silent neighborhood. The door swung inward. The smell hit first, sharp, organic, wrong. Stale air mixed with something she couldn't name, but recognized in her gut. Elaine's vision blurred. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. Darkness pooled inside. Thick, unnatural darkness for midday. She couldn't see more than a few feet into the entryway. Dust particles drifted through the shaft of light she'd let in, swirling like disturbed ghosts. Then she heard it. A sound so faint she thought she'd imagined it. A scraping, movement against floorboards. Elaine froze, every muscle locked. Her rational mind screamed raccoons, rats, wind through a broken window. But her body knew better. Her body recognized something her mind refused to accept. She took one step inside, then another. The scraping stopped. In the shadows near the base of the staircase, something shifted. Not large, not aggressive, just present, waiting. Elaine's vision adjusted slowly. She could make out shapes now, overturned furniture, scattered debris, the outline of the hallway stretching back into deeper darkness. And then she saw the eyes, reflective, exhausted, locked on her with an intensity that made her knees buckle. Not the eyes of a stranger or an intruder. Eyes that had haunted her nightmares for 93 days straight. Elaine's breath caught in her chest. Her hand flew to her mouth as recognition crashed through her like a physical blow. She tried to speak, but could only produce a broken sound, half gasp, half sob. The shape moved forward, dragging itself inch by painful inch into the light. What emerged wasn't the animal she remembered. It was a skeletal shadow of that memory, ribs visible beneath matted fur, legs trembling with effort, skin hanging loose where muscle had once been. The mismatched ears she'd loved so much were pressed flat against a skull that looked too large for the emaciated body beneath it. But the eyes hadn't changed, still gentle, still searching, still impossibly, devastatingly loyal. "Cosmo," Elaine whispered, the name scraping past her lips like gravel. The dog, what remained of him, took another weak step forward. His tail gave the faintest twitch, as if his body had forgotten how to express joy, but his spirit insisted on trying. Elaine collapsed to her knees, a sound tearing from her throat that was too raw to be called crying. Her vision swam with tears she'd held back for months, tears she denied herself because she didn't deserve relief from this guilt. But now the guilt had a shape, a face, a heartbeat. He was here. He was alive. He had survived. Elaine couldn't understand it at all. How had he endured 3 months alone in a sealed house? Why hadn't the authorities cleared the building like they'd promised? And how long had he spent waiting, starving, suffering, hoping for a door that never opened? Before we begin, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss the next one. 3 months ago, Cosmo had been a different dog entirely. Not younger. He'd been pushing 11 even then, with gray creeping through the fur around his muzzle and a slight hitch in his back left leg when the weather turned cold. But whole. Healthy. Content in the way only a dog who knows he's loved can be. The mornings had followed the same pattern for years. Elaine would wake to the sound of Cosmo's nails clicking against the hardwood floor as he made his way from his bed by the door to her bedside. No barking, no whining, just that patient clicking, followed by the soft huff of breath as he sat and waited for her to acknowledge him. She never made him wait long. "Morning, buddy," she'd murmur, reaching down to scratch behind those mismatched ears, one that flopped forward, one that stood stubbornly upright, no matter how many times she'd tried to train it down when he was younger. Cosmo would lean into her hand, eyes half closed, tail thumping against the floor in steady, contented beats. Then they'd move through the routine, Cosmo padding after her to the kitchen, sitting in his designated spot by the counter while she filled his bowl with kibble and the special joint supplement the vet had recommended. He'd wait for her nod before eating, always patient, always polite. While he ate, Elaine would make coffee and stand at the kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street and the houses that had become as familiar as her own. Kathleen Evans would already be up, tending to the flower boxes on her front porch across the street. She'd wave if she caught Elaine's eye. Sometimes she'd cross over later, with muffins or tomatoes from her garden, always stopping to give Cosmo a scratch and tell him what a handsome boy he was. Cecilia Machine was harder to spot. She preferred her backyard, her privacy. But occasionally, Elaine would glimpse her through the fence, reading on her patio or trimming hedges with meticulous precision. She wasn't unfriendly exactly, just contained, self-sufficient. After breakfast, Cosmo would follow Elaine from room to room as she got ready for the day. When she worked from home, he'd settle under her desk, his warm weight against her feet. When she had to leave for client meetings, he'd watch from the window, nose pressed to the glass, until her car disappeared around the corner. He'd been her constant for 2 years now, ever since the divorce papers were signed and David had moved out, taking half the furniture and all of the easy conversation that used to fill the house. The silence after David left had been crushing, the kind of quiet that made every creak of the floorboards sound like an accusation. But Cosmo had stayed. He'd curled up next to her on the couch during the nights she couldn't stop crying. He'd pressed his body against her legs during panic attacks that came out of nowhere. He'd existed, warm and solid and uncomplicated, when everything else in her life felt like it was disintegrating. "You're the only good thing I didn't mess up," she'd told him once, late at night, her fingers buried in his fur. Cosmo had simply rested his chin on her knee and looked at her with those patient, understanding eyes. The house had slowly become theirs, not hers and David's, but hers and Cosmo's. She'd started leaving the back door open so he could wander in and out of the yard at will. She'd bought him a second bed for the living room, though he rarely used it, preferring to sleep by the front door like he was standing guard. She'd learned which squeaky toys he loved and which ones he'd politely ignore. She'd memorized the way he tilted his head when she talked to him, like he was trying to understand every word. On that last normal Tuesday in June, everything had felt perfectly ordinary. Elaine had worked through the morning, Cosmo dozing under her desk. Around noon, she'd taken him for a walk around the block. His pace had been slower than it used to be, that arthritic leg acting up, but his tail wagged the entire time. And he'd stopped to sniff every interesting spot with the dedication of a dog who still loved the world. Kathleen had been outside watering her roses. "Beautiful day," she'd called out. "Gorgeous," Elaine agreed, letting Cosmo sniff the edge of Kathleen's lawn. "How's our boy doing?" Kathleen crouched down to give Cosmo a proper greeting, laughing when he licked her hand. "Getting old like the rest of us," Elaine said, but she was smiling. Cosmo's tail hadn't stopped wagging. That afternoon, Elaine had noticed a faint smell while making lunch. Something chemical, slightly sweet. She'd checked the stove, the outlets, but couldn't find a source. Probably something from outside. A neighbor's project, nothing to worry about. By evening, the smell had faded. Elaine heated up leftover pasta, gave Cosmo his dinner, and settled on the couch with a book she'd been meaning to finish for weeks. Cosmo had jumped up beside her, a movement that took more effort than it used to, and rested his head on her lap. She'd stroked his fur absently while reading, feeling his breathing slow as he drifted toward sleep. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, peaceful. Kathleen's porch light glowed softly across the street. Somewhere down the block, someone was grilling, the smell of charcoal drifting through the open windows. Around 8, Cosmo had climbed down from the couch and made his way to his usual spot by the front door. He'd circled twice before settling down with a contented sigh, his body forming a gentle curve against the wall. His nose pointed toward the door, like always. Elaine had glanced over at him, feeling that familiar surge of gratitude for his simple, steady presence. "Good night, buddy," she'd called softly. His tail thumped once against the floor in response. That was the last peaceful moment either of them would know for a very long time. In the distance, barely audible over the hum of the television, sirens began to wail. And they were getting closer. The sirens weren't distant for long. Within minutes, they were everywhere. Fire trucks, police cars, ambulances converging from multiple directions. Red and blue lights strobed across the houses, turning the peaceful neighborhood into something out of a nightmare. Elaine stood at her window, heart hammering, watching neighbors emerge onto their porches with confused, frightened expressions. Cosmo was on his feet now, ears pressed flat against his head. A low whine built in his throat. "It's okay, buddy," Elaine said, but her voice came out thin and uncertain. She reached for her phone just as it started ringing. The neighborhood emergency alert. Mandatory evacuation in effect. Gas leak, 400 block of Sycamore Street. Potential explosion hazard. Evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. The words didn't make sense at first. Gas leak. Explosion. Their street was Sycamore. The 400 block was 3 houses down. A sharp knock rattled her front door. Elaine yanked it open to find a fire official in full gear, face stern behind his protective mask. "You need to leave, now. Gas may rupture down the street. We've got 20 minutes, maybe less." 20 minutes to what? To get everyone out before we shut down the block completely. Pack essentials only, move fast. He was already turning away, heading for Kathleen's house across the street. Elaine's mind went blank. 20 minutes. Essentials. What were essentials? Her hands shook as she grabbed her purse, her laptop, the framed photo of her mother from the mantel. Cosmo followed her from room to room, his anxiety building with every movement, every slammed drawer. Outside, the chaos was escalating. Car engines roared to life. People shouted to each other across yards. A family 3 doors down was loading children into a minivan, the kids crying. Someone's car alarm was blaring. Elaine rushed to the bedroom for clothes, phone charger, medication. Her brain couldn't prioritize. Everything felt equally important and completely meaningless. She grabbed a duffel bag and started stuffing things inside with no organization, no thought. Behind her, Cosmo began to pace. "We're leaving in a minute, buddy. Just hold on." An explosion shattered the air. Not close, maybe 2 blocks away, but massive. The house shuddered. A car alarm shrieked to life. Through the window, Elaine saw a fireball rising into the darkening sky, black smoke billowing. Cosmo bolted. 1 second he was beside her. The next he was gone, a blur of fur disappearing down the hallway. Elaine heard his nails skittering on the hardwood, heard the frantic scrambling as he tried to find somewhere safe. "Cosmo!" She dropped the bag and ran after him. "Cosmo, come here!" But he was in full panic mode now, that primitive terror that overrides all training, all trust. She found him in the kitchen, wedged behind the trash can, eyes wide and white-rimmed, body trembling violently. "It's okay, baby. We just need to go." Another knock, this one harder. Urgent. The same official's voice, shouting through the door. "Everyone out! Now! We're clearing the block!" Elaine lunged for Cosmo, trying to get her arms around him. He'd never been good with loud noises. Thunderstorms would send him hiding in the bathroom. 4th of July was a nightmare. But this was worse. His entire body was rigid with fear. "Come on, Cosmo, please!" He twisted out of her grip and bolted again. This time he ran for the living room. Elaine chased after him, calling his name, her own panic rising to match his. Outside, engines revved, more shouting, the crackle of radio static. Time was running out. She cornered him by the couch, dropped to her knees, reached out with both hands. "Cosmo, we have to go." He darted past her, straight for the front door, which she'd left open in her rush to pack. "No!" Elaine lunged, missed. Cosmo shot through the doorway and into the chaos outside. She stumbled after him onto the porch, screaming his name into the smoke-tinged air. Red lights everywhere, people running, engines roaring, and somewhere in that confusion, a brown and white dog disappearing into the darkness. "Cosmo!" Elaine jumped off the porch, running in the direction she'd seen him go. Her voice was already going hoarse. "Cosmo, come back!" She ran down the sidewalk, checking between cars, behind bushes. Her lungs burned. Neighbors were evacuating in both directions, a stream of vehicles and frightened faces. No one had time to help her look. "Please!" she shouted at no one and everyone. "Has anyone seen my dog?" Kathleen appeared beside her, already wearing a coat, keys in hand. "Elaine, we have to go." "I can't find Cosmo. He ran out and I can't." "I saw him." Kathleen grabbed her arm, pointing back toward the house. He ran back inside. I saw him go through your front door. Elaine's blood turned to ice. She spun around, already running back. The house was still standing, the door hanging open like a mouth. She made it 3 steps before a fire official blocked her path. Ma'am, you need to evacuate. My dog is inside. No one goes back in. It's not safe. Then you go in. Please. Tears were streaming down her face now. He's just a dog. He's scared. He won't understand. The official's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. We'll check the houses once the area is secure, I promise. But right now, you need to leave. I can't leave him. You have to. His hand was on her shoulder now, physically steering her away from the house. We'll check. We'll make sure. But you can't be here when we shut down the block. Kathleen was pulling her toward the street, toward her car. Come on, honey. They said they'll check. Come stay with me. Elaine let herself be led, her eyes locked on the open door of her house. Somewhere inside, Cosmo was hiding, terrified, waiting for her to come back and tell him everything was okay. You'll check? She called over her shoulder. You promise you'll check? We'll check every house, I promise. Kathleen's car door opened. Elaine climbed inside, numb. Through the windshield, she watched more emergency vehicles arrive, watched neighbors stream past, and watched the organized chaos of an evacuation in progress. And then she watched as a different official, one she didn't recognize, approached her front door and pulled it shut. The sound of it closing carried across the distance, final as a tomb ceiling. Kathleen's car pulled away from the curb, joining the line of vehicles fleeing the block. Elaine twisted in her seat, staring back through the rear window. Emergency lights painted everything in harsh, flickering colors. Her house grew smaller. The door stayed closed. And somewhere behind that closed door, Cosmo was waiting for her to come back and make everything okay. The last thing Elaine saw before they turned the corner was the house disappearing into darkness as the emergency lights moved on to secure the next block. The first 3 days, Elaine called every hour. Fire department, police non-emergency line, the county emergency management office. Each time she asked the same questions. Had they checked her house? Had they found her dog? When could she go back? Each time, the answers were variations of the same bureaucratic deflection. The area is still being assessed. We'll call you when it's safe to return. All houses in the evacuation zone are being inspected. By the 4th day, she stopped believing them. By the end of the first week, the evacuation zone had shrunk. 3 blocks cleared for re-entry. Then 5. Then 7. Neighbors were returning home, posting updates on the neighborhood Facebook group about minor damage, about relief, about gratitude that it hadn't been worse. Elaine's block stayed red on the hazard map. She stayed at Kathleen's, sleeping on the pull-out couch, checking her phone every 20 minutes. Kathleen brought her tea she didn't drink and made sympathetic noises that didn't help. They said they'd check, Kathleen kept repeating. They promised. But no one called. On day 9, Elaine drove past the barricades when no officials were watching. Her street looked normal, untouched, quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. Her house stood exactly as she'd left it. The door was closed, windows dark, no signs of entry, no signs of inspection, no signs of life. A police cruiser spotted her before she could get closer. Ma'am, this area is still restricted. Has anyone checked the houses? The inspection team is working through the zone systematically. That's not an answer. Has anyone actually gone inside these houses? The officer's expression shifted, uncomfortable. I can't speak to the specific inspection schedule. So that's a no. Elaine's voice cracked. No one's checked. Ma'am, I need you to leave the area. She left, but the image of that closed door stayed burned in her mind. By week 3, the official updates had stopped coming entirely. The emergency hotline she'd been calling went to voicemail. When she finally reached a human at the county office, they had to put her on hold to even find her address in the system. It looks like your block is scheduled for final clearance next month, the bored voice said. Next month? It's been 3 weeks. There's a process, ma'am. We're working as fast as we can. She hung up before she started screaming. That night, Elaine stopped asking questions because she already knew the answer she feared. Cosmo was gone. Either he'd escaped somehow and was lost, or he'd been trapped inside for 3 weeks with no food, no water, no hope. Both possibilities were unbearable. Both possibilities were her fault. She stopped checking the Facebook group, stopped driving past the barricades, stopped calling the hotline. Kathleen watched her sink into a silence that felt like drowning, but didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound hollow. What Elaine didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that someone else had noticed. Cecilia Machen had returned to her house on day 12, when her block was finally cleared. She'd walked through her home checking for damage, relieved to find everything intact. That evening, she'd sat on her back patio with a glass of wine, trying to decompress from the chaos. That's when she'd noticed Elaine's house was still dark. No lights, no movement. The car was still gone from the driveway. Cecilia hadn't known Elaine well. They'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence a few times, nothing more. But something about the empty house nagged at her. Most of the neighborhood was back now. Most houses had lights on, had families moving around inside. Elaine stayed dark. On day 16, Cecilia heard something that made her blood run cold. She'd been in her kitchen, washing dishes after dinner, when a sound drifted through the open window. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Whining. High-pitched, desperate, coming from the direction of Elaine's house. Cecilia dried her hands and stepped outside, listening. The sound came again. Weaker this time, but definitely there. An animal in distress. She grabbed her phone and called animal control. The dispatcher was efficient but detached. Animal trapped in a residence? We'll send someone out to check. When? Within 24 hours. The whining continued through the night. Cecilia barely slept. Animal control arrived the next afternoon. A single officer in a white van, looking harried and overworked. Cecilia watched from her window as he approached Elaine's house, knocked loudly on the door, and waited 30 seconds. No answer. He knocked again, tried the doorknob, locked. He walked around the perimeter, peering in windows, then returned to his van and made notes on a clipboard. 2 minutes later, he was driving away. Cecilia ran outside. Wait! Did you find anything? He rolled down his window. No response. The house is locked up tight. If there's an animal inside, someone will need to provide access. But I heard, call us back when the homeowner returns, ma'am. He was gone before she could argue. That evening, Kathleen appeared at Cecilia's door, looking worried. Did you see them leave food at Elaine's? Animal control? They didn't even try to get inside. Kathleen's face crumpled. That poor dog! If he's in there! They both knew what it meant by now. Still, Kathleen tried. She found a broken window screen on the side of the house and left bowls of kibble and water where an animal might be able to reach them. She came back every few days, replacing the food, hoping. Some of it disappeared, but the raccoons came at night too, and the neighborhood cats. There was no way to know if Cosmo was getting any of it. The whining continued, sporadic and heartbreaking. Some nights Cecilia heard it, some nights she didn't. She called animal control twice more. They never came back. By week 8, Kathleen had stopped leaving food. "I think he's gone," she said quietly to Cecilia one evening, both of them standing in the space between their yards. "I haven't heard anything in days." Cecilia nodded, though her chest felt tight. The house remained dark. The door remained locked, and somewhere inside, or not anymore, Cosmo had either escaped or stopped trying. Week 10 arrived with early autumn chill. The leaves on Elaine's trees were starting to turn. Her grass had grown wild, sending up seed heads that swayed in the wind. The house looked more abandoned with each passing day. Cecilia sat on her patio that night, wrapped in a sweater, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood settling into sleep. She waited for the whining she'd grown accustomed to. It didn't come. Not that night, not the next. And somewhere in the darkness of the sealed house across the yard, the silence that had replaced it was so much worse than the sound had ever been. The door didn't open. That was the first truth Cosmo learned in the darkness, though he didn't understand it as truth, only as wrongness that wouldn't correct itself. He'd returned to the door the moment the chaos outside had faded. Returned because doors were where she always came back. Doors were where waiting happened, and waiting always ended with the voice, her hands, her presence making everything right again. So he waited. The first night, he scratched. Not frantically, just reminders. The polite scratches he'd used before, when he needed to go out, when he wanted her attention. "I'm here. The door is closed. Please." She didn't come. The scratching became more insistent. His nails caught on wood, on paint that peeled away in thin strips. He could smell the outside through the crack at the bottom, could smell grass and other animals, and all the scents that meant the world beyond. But the door wouldn't move. By the second day, his paws were raw. He licked them between attempts, tasting blood, not understanding why the door that had always opened refused to obey the old rules. Thirst came before hunger. He found water in the cold white bowl in the small room, the one that made sounds sometimes, the one she'd always scolded him for drinking from before. Now there was no scolding, just water that tasted wrong but satisfied the desperate need. He learned to drink carefully. The water didn't refill itself. Hunger was harder. His bowl sat empty in the kitchen. He nosed it hopefully the first few days, checking, rechecking, waiting for the familiar sound of kibble hitting metal. The sound never came. He searched. Every room, every corner, following his nose to find the crumbs he'd ignored before. A piece of pasta that had fallen behind the stove. Fragments of crackers in the couch cushions. He learned to chew slowly, to make each discovery last. When the crumbs ran out, he chewed other things. The wooden leg of the kitchen chair, the corner of the couch cushion where stuffing could be pulled free and worried for hours. None of it filled his stomach, but his jaws needed the motion, needed something to do while he waited. The nights were the worst. Without her warmth, without the routine that had structured his life, The darkness felt endless. He curled by the door anyway, because the door was still his post, still his purpose. His body grew cold. The house grew colder. Sometimes he heard sounds outside, scratching at the broken window, the rustling of the food bowls. He'd drag himself to investigate, but the opening was too high, too small. He'd smell food close by, but couldn't reach it. Other animals came and went, taking what he needed. He always returned to the door. Weeks became indistinguishable. Light filtered through windows, then faded. The water in the bowl grew stale. His body began eating itself, muscle, then fat, that he had little of to begin with. His ribs became visible. His fur began to fall out in patches where his skin had grown irritated. The hitch in his back leg worsened until walking became a deliberate effort. Still, each morning, when morning could be determined by the angle of light through the windows, he checked the door. Just in case today was the day. By the second month, the scratching had stopped. Not because he'd given up, but because his paws couldn't take it anymore. The exposed flesh had hardened into calluses, but the energy it took to stand, to reach, to claw at wood, had become too expensive. He watched the door from where he lay instead. The toilet water ran out. He learned to lick condensation from the bathroom pipes. Later, when even that dried up, he survived on what moisture remained in his own mouth, what little his body could still produce. The hunger became a constant companion, not the sharp pangs of the first weeks, but a hollow, consuming emptiness that made his legs shake when he tried to stand. He stopped standing. The door was still visible from where he lay beneath the stairs. That was enough. That had to be enough. 300 miles away, Elaine sat in a coffee shop she'd never been to before, staring at a laptop screen that might as well have been blank. She'd moved out of Kathleen's after 6 weeks. Couldn't stand the pitying looks, the careful way Kathleen asked if she was okay, the unspoken knowledge that hung between them. She'd found a sublet across town, anonymous, temporary, a place where no one knew about the dog she'd abandoned. Abandoned. The word tasted like poison. She'd stopped correcting herself when the thought surfaced, stopped pretending there was a difference between intentional abandonment and the kind that happened through negligence, through trust in systems that failed, through her own cowardice in not forcing her way back inside. The guilt had evolved into something else by now, not the sharp, fresh horror of the first weeks, but a dull, constant weight that colored everything gray. She ate because she had to, slept because exhaustion eventually won, existed because stopping wasn't actually a choice, but she didn't live. The county had cleared her block for re-entry after 10 weeks. The email had arrived in her inbox with bureaucratic cheerfulness. Your property has been inspected and deemed safe for occupancy. She'd deleted it without reading past the first line. Going back meant knowing. Knowing meant confronting what her absence had cost. And Elaine had become an expert at avoiding confrontation. With the truth, with herself, with the door she'd let close. Inside the house, Cosmo's world had narrowed to the most basic functions. Breathe. Wait. Breathe. His body was skeletal now, every bone visible, every movement a negotiation with limbs that barely responded. The chronic pain in his back leg had spread to become a full-body ache that never stopped. But somewhere in the fog of hunger and exhaustion, the waiting remained. Not because he understood time or hope anymore, but because the door was still there, and the door had always meant her return. Some truths ran deeper than suffering. On the 92nd day, something changed. A sound. Faint, distant, but distinct. Footsteps. Cosmo's ears twitched. The only part of him that could still move without effort. His eyes, clouded but still functional, fixed on the door. The footsteps came closer. Stopped. Silence stretched, so complete that Cosmo wondered if he'd imagined it, if hunger and isolation had finally broken something in his mind that couldn't be repaired. Then, the sound of metal scraping metal. A key. The lock turning. After 3 months of waiting, after 93 days of darkness and silence and impossible endurance, the door was finally opening. And on the other side, a familiar scent, weaker than he remembered, tangled with fear and grief, but unmistakable. Her. Cosmo tried to stand. His legs wouldn't hold him. He tried again, trembling, desperate. Light spilled into the hallway, too bright after so long in the dark, and somewhere in that light, her shape appeared. Finally, the present crashed back into focus with the force of a physical blow. Elaine knelt on the floor of her own hallway, the phone's flashlight casting harsh shadows across walls she'd once known by heart. But nothing looked familiar anymore. The destruction, the smell, the evidence of suffering etched into every surface. This was a different house, a tomb she'd sealed without meaning to. And in the darkness beneath the stairs, Cosmo stared back at her. Not the dog she remembered, not the gentle, aging companion who'd slept by her feet and greeted her with tail wags. This was something pulled from a nightmare, skeletal, filthy, barely recognizable as the animal she'd loved. But his eyes. God, his eyes were the same. The recognition hit Elaine like a train. Every defense she'd built over 3 months, every rationalization, every lie she'd told herself about why she couldn't come back, shattered in an instant. Cosmo, she whispered, and the name came out broken. Oh God, Cosmo! Her legs gave out. She collapsed forward onto her hands, the phone skittering across the floor, its light spinning wild patterns across the ceiling. The sound that tore from her throat wasn't quite human, part sob, part wail, pure anguish made audible. He was here, he was alive, he had waited. For her. Elaine pressed her palms against the filthy floor, her whole body shaking with sobs she couldn't control. She'd thought she'd cried out all her tears weeks ago, but they came now in a flood. Hot, endless, carrying 3 months of guilt and grief and horror with them. I'm sorry, she gasped between sobs. I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. Cosmo hadn't moved. He lay in his spot beneath the stairs, watching her. Not with excitement, not with the eager recognition she'd seen 1,000 times before. His gaze was cautious, uncertain, like he didn't quite believe she was real. Or worse, like he didn't trust that she would stay. The realization cut deeper than anything else. She'd broken something beyond his body. She'd broken his faith in the one constant his entire life had been built around, that she would always come back. I'm here, Elaine whispered, crawling forward on her hands and knees. Tears dripped onto the floor beneath her. I'm here now, baby. I'm so sorry. Cosmo's head lifted slightly. A tremor ran through his emaciated body. Elaine inched closer, moving slowly, terrified he'd try to run and hurt himself further. Her hand stretched out, fingers trembling. It's me. It's really me. The distance between them felt infinite. 5 feet that contained 3 months of abandonment, of suffering, of waiting that should have killed him but hadn't. Please, she breathed. Please, Cosmo. His nose twitched, scenting her. confirming what his eyes insisted couldn't be true. Then, impossibly, his tail moved. Not a wag. He didn't have the strength for that. Just a single weak twitch against the floor. The ghost of the greeting he used to give her every single day. Elaine's breath caught. She crawled closer, tears blurring her vision. "That's it, buddy. That's my good boy." Cosmo tried to stand. His front legs pushed against the floor, shaking violently with effort. His back legs, the one that had always been weak, that she'd given him supplements for, that she'd watched grow worse with age, couldn't support him at all. He collapsed back down with a soft whimper. "No, don't." Elaine closed the last of the distance between them, falling to her knees beside him. "Don't try to get up, just stay still. I've got you." Her hands found his fur, matted, filthy, falling out in patches, and she didn't care. She stroked his head, his neck, his bony shoulders, feeling every rib, every vertebra that shouldn't be visible. "I've got you," she repeated, choking on the words. "I'm not leaving again. I promise. I'm never leaving you again." Cosmo's eyes closed briefly, then opened again, like he was fighting to stay conscious, to make sure this moment was real before it could be taken away. Elaine bent over him, pressing her forehead against his. The smell was overwhelming, decay and waste and desperation, but she didn't pull back. She breathed in the evidence of her failure, let it fill her lungs, accepted it as penance. "I love you," she whispered against his fur. "I love you so much. I'm sorry I left you. I'm sorry I didn't come back sooner. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Cosmo's head shifted, pressing weakly against her chest. The gesture he'd made countless times before, his way of saying he trusted her, that she was safe, that everything was okay when she was near. But this time, it felt like forgiveness. That broke her completely. Elaine wrapped her arms around him as carefully as she could, trying not to hurt him, trying to hold what was left of him without causing more damage. Her sobs came harder, wrenching her entire body. She felt his breathing against her chest, shallow, labored, but steady. Felt his heart beating, impossibly still beating after everything he'd endured. "We're going to fix this," she promised, her voice raw. "I'm going to get you help. The vet, the hospital, whatever you need. You're going to be okay. You have to be okay." Cosmo's breathing hitched. Elaine pulled back slightly, looking down at him. His eyes were still open, still watching her. But something had changed. The effort it was taking him to stay conscious, to stay present, was written across every line of his gaunt face. "Cosmo?" Panic crept into her voice. "Stay with me, buddy. Stay with me." His tail twitched once more, the barest movement. Then his eyes closed. "No." Elaine's hand moved to his chest, feeling for his heartbeat. It was there, faint, irregular, but there. "No, no, no, don't you dare. Don't you dare leave me now." She fumbled for her phone with one hand, the other still pressed against Cosmo's chest. Her fingers were shaking so badly she could barely unlock the screen. Emergency vet. She needed an emergency vet. Now. Cosmo's breathing grew shallower. "Hold on," Elaine begged, tears streaming down her face as she tried to dial. "Please, Cosmo, just hold on a little longer." His body went limp in her arms. Not dead. She could still feel his heartbeat, still see the faint rise and fall of his chest. But unconscious. His body finally surrendering to the exhaustion it had been fighting for 3 months. Elaine's scream echoed through the empty house. And in her arms, Cosmo, loyal, patient, impossibly faithful Cosmo, had finally stopped waiting. Now it was her turn to fight for him. Elaine didn't remember the drive to the emergency vet. One moment, she was cradling Cosmo's limp body in the hallway, phone pressed to her ear with a shaking hand. The next, she was in her car. When had she gotten her car? With Cosmo wrapped in a blanket on the passenger seat, his shallow breathing the only sound louder than her racing heartbeat. Red lights. She ran at least 2. Didn't care. Couldn't care about anything except the rise and fall of his chest, the proof that he was still here, still fighting. The emergency clinic appeared like a beacon, harsh fluorescent lights cutting through the darkness. Elaine slammed the car into park and threw open the door, gathering Cosmo with trembling arms. He barely weighed anything. The clinic doors slid open automatically. A vet tech looked up from the desk, her professional expression shifting instantly to alarm. "I need help!" Elaine gasped. "Please, my dog. He's been trapped. 3 months." The tech was already moving, calling for backup. Hands took Cosmo from her arms. Careful, efficient hands that knew what they were doing. A stretcher appeared. Voices overlapped. Clinical terms Elaine couldn't process. Severe malnutrition. Dehydration. Critical. Get an IV started. They disappeared through double doors with Cosmo, leaving Elaine standing in the lobby, her empty arms still shaped around the weight of him. Blood and dirt stained her shirt. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. A different woman appeared, older, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Ma'am, I'm Dr. Chen. I need you to tell me everything." Everything. The word felt impossible, but Elaine tried. The evacuation, the chaos, Cosmo bolting, the promise from officials that they'd check. 3 months of silence. The door that was never opened. Dr. Chen's expression darkened with each sentence. When Elaine finished, the vet was quiet for a moment. 3 months? She repeated, completely sealed inside? Elaine nodded, not trusting her voice. "We're going to do everything we can," Dr. Chen said carefully. "But I need you to understand. His condition is critical. Organ damage from prolonged starvation, severe dehydration, possible infections. The next few hours will tell us if he has to survive." Elaine's voice cracked. "He has to, after everything he endured." "We'll do our best. That's all I can promise." Dr. Chen disappeared back through the double doors, leaving Elaine alone with a clipboard full of forms she couldn't focus on and a waiting room chair that felt like a prison. She'd just pulled out her phone to, what? Call someone? Stare at it uselessly? When the clinic doors opened behind her. "Elaine?" Kathleen's voice. Elaine turned to find both Kathleen and Cecilia standing in the entrance, faces pale with shock. "I saw your car at the house," Kathleen said, rushing forward. "The door was open and I—" Her eyes went to the blood on Elaine's shirt. "Oh God, is he—" "Alive. Barely." Elaine's voice sounded hollow even to herself. "He was inside. The whole time. He was inside the whole time." Kathleen's hand flew to her mouth. Cecilia's expression fractured. "I heard him," Cecilia said quietly. "Weeks ago, I called animal control. They came, but they—" She stopped, shaking her head. "I should have done more." "You tried," Kathleen added, her voice breaking. "I left food. I thought maybe he'd gotten out. Maybe he was surviving somehow." "He was in the house." Elaine looked at them both. "Locked inside. For 3 months." The silence that followed felt suffocating. "The officials said they'd check," Kathleen whispered. "They promised They never did. The words tasted like ash. The house was never cleared. No one ever opened that door. Elaine watched the truth land on their faces. The same truth that had been crushing her since the moment she'd found Cosmo. This wasn't just negligence. It was a systematic failure that had condemned an innocent animal to months of suffering. "I need to go back," Elaine said suddenly. "I need to see—" "No!" Kathleen grabbed her arm. "You need to stay here. We'll go look." Before Elaine could argue, they were gone. Kathleen and Cecilia stood in Elaine's hallway 40 minutes later, both of them silent as they took in what the darkness had hidden. The scratches on the door were the worst, deep gouges that went through paint, through wood, down to bare splinters. Kathleen traced them with shaking fingers, seeing the desperation in every mark, the days and weeks of trying that had slowly destroyed Cosmo's paws. The food bowls sat exactly where they'd always been, empty, untouched by anyone who could have helped. In the living room, couch cushions had been torn apart, stuffing pulled free and scattered. The wooden chair leg in the kitchen bore deep teeth marks, evidence of hunger so consuming it had driven him to chew furniture. Cecilia found the bathroom. The toilet bowl was bone dry. Scratches around the pipes showed where Cosmo had tried to find moisture. They didn't speak as they documented everything with their phones. The evidence needed to exist beyond their memory. When they returned to the clinic, Kathleen's face was streaked with tears. "Elaine, the door, the scratches. I saw them. He tried so hard to get out." Kathleen's voice broke. "He tried so hard and no one came." Word spread through the neighborhood by morning. Not as scandal, but as something quieter, more devastating. People brought flowers to Elaine's porch, cards that said, "We're sorry," and "Praying for Cosmo." The neighborhood Facebook group exploded with messages, not of blame toward Elaine, but of shared outrage at the system that had failed so completely. Someone started a fund for Cosmo's medical bills. Within 6 hours, it had exceeded its goal. 3 months, one post read. He waited 3 months. That's not just survival, that's love. Another, everyone who promised to check and didn't should be ashamed. This never should have happened. But the quiet responses resonated more. The ones that simply said, "He waited. He never stopped waiting." At the clinic, Dr. Chen emerged at dawn. Her face was grave. Elaine stood on legs that felt like they might give out. "Is he—" "He's alive. We've stabilized him for now. But Elaine—" Dr. Chen paused, choosing her words carefully. "The damage is extensive. His organs have begun to shut down for prolonged starvation. We're doing everything we can, but the next 24 hours are critical." "What are you saying?" Dr. Chen met her eyes. "I'm saying that even with everything we're doing, Cosmo might not survive the night." The waiting room chair became Elaine's entire world. Beige vinyl, a tear in the left armrest, a stain near the bottom she didn't want to identify. She memorized every detail in the first hour. By the third hour, she'd stopped seeing it at all. The clock on the wall ticked too loud. Or maybe that was just her heartbeat, amplified by exhaustion and terror. Every time the double doors opened, she jumped. Every time it wasn't Dr. Chen, it wasn't news about Cosmo, she sank back down. Waiting. The irony wasn't lost on her. For 3 months, Cosmo had waited. Alone, starving, dying by inches, he had waited for her to come back. Now she knew how that felt. Memories played on a loop she couldn't stop. Cosmo as a puppy. Well, not quite a puppy when she'd adopted him, but young enough, bouncing with that clumsy enthusiasm that made her laugh for the first time in months after the divorce papers were signed. His mismatched ears that never quite matched, never quite cooperated. The way he'd curl up next to her on the couch, solid and warm, asking for nothing except to be near her. The morning of the evacuation, the panic in his eyes when the explosion shook the house. The way he'd bolted, driven by instinct older than training, older than trust. The door is closing. That image stuck, playing over and over. The official pulling her door shut. The finality of it. And Elaine, driving away in Kathleen's car, believing someone else would handle it. Believing the system worked. Believing anything except that her failure to fight harder, to check herself, to break down that door if necessary, would cost Cosmo 3 months of hell. "This is my fault," she whispered to the empty room. "All of it." No. Elaine looked up. Kathleen stood in the entrance, holding 2 coffee cups. Cecilia was behind her, quieter but present. "Don't say that," Kathleen continued, crossing to sit beside her. "You were told they'd check. You trusted." "I should have known better." Elaine's voice was hollow. "I should have gone back sooner. Should have broken in myself. Should have." "Should have what?" Cecilia's voice cut through, sharper than Elaine had ever heard it. She moved closer, arms crossed. "Ignored evacuation orders? Gotten yourself arrested for trespassing in a hazard zone? Tell me, what exactly could you have done differently that wouldn't have ended with you in jail and Cosmo still trapped?" Elaine opened her mouth. Closed it. "I heard him," Cecilia continued, her voice softening. "Weeks ago, I called animal control. They came, they knocked, they left." She paused, her composure cracking. "I called them twice more. They never came back. I tried, Elaine. I really tried. But I couldn't break into your house either. Neither could Kathleen." "I left food," Kathleen added quietly. "I don't even know if he got any of it." "Probably not. Probably raccoons took it all." Her voice broke. "We all failed him. The system failed him. But you were lied to. You were told it was handled." "I still should have checked." Elaine's hands twisted in her lap. "I lived 3 miles away. I could have driven past. Could have seen the house was never opened. But I didn't, because I was too afraid of what I'd find." The truth of it hung in the air between them. "So you were afraid," Kathleen said gently. "You're human. Humans get afraid." "He deserved better than my fear." "Yes," Cecilia agreed bluntly. "He did. And you'll have to live with that. But he also deserves for you to be here now, to fight for him now." The double doors swung open. All 3 women shot to their feet. Dr. Chen looked exhausted, surgical cap still on, but her expression had shifted from the grim determination of earlier. Not quite a smile, but not despair either. "He made it through surgery," she said. Elaine's legs buckled. Kathleen caught her, held her upright. "His vitals have stabilized," Dr. Chen continued. "We've repaired what we could. Intestinal damage from malnutrition, dehydration damage to his kidneys. We're running IV fluids, antibiotics, pain management. But there was always a but. His recovery is far from certain. The trauma to his system was extreme. Even with everything we've done, his organs could still fail. The next 72 hours will tell us if he can come back from this." "Can I see him?" Elaine's voice was barely audible. Dr. Chen hesitated. "He's sedated. He won't know you're there." "Please," Something in Elaine's face must have resonated. Dr. Chen nodded. 5 minutes. Follow me. The recovery room was small, dim, filled with the quiet beeping of monitors. Cosmo lay on a padded table, wrapped in heated blankets, IV lines running from both front legs. An oxygen tube rested near his nose. He looked so small, like a shadow of a shadow. Elaine approached slowly, afraid to disturb him, afraid he'd disappear if she moved too fast. Her hand found his head, stroking gently between his ears. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not leaving. Not this time." The monitors beeped steadily. His chest rose and fell, assisted by medication, by machinery, by everything medical science could provide. "When you wake up," Elaine continued, tears sliding down her cheeks, "I'm going to make you a promise. The door, our door, it's never closing again. Not on you, not on anyone I love." She leaned closer, pressing her forehead against his. No more shutting out the world, no more hiding from hard things, no more letting fear make my decisions. Cosmo didn't respond, couldn't respond, but Elaine meant every word. "You waited for me," she breathed. 3 months in the dark, and you waited. So now I'm waiting for you, however long it takes. I'm not going anywhere. Dr. Chen touched her shoulder gently. "Time's up. He needs rest." Elaine nodded, straightening. She started to pull her hand away. Cosmo's eyelids fluttered. Elaine froze. "Did he—" The monitors beeped faster. Cosmo's eyes opened, just barely, just slits, and his gaze, unfocused and clouded with sedation, found her face. Recognition flickered there, faint but unmistakable. His tail, barely visible under the blankets, moved. One weak thump. Then his eyes closed again, slipping back into sedated sleep. But Elaine had seen it. That flicker of awareness. That moment of knowing she was there. He was still fighting. And if he could fight, then so could she. Recovery was measured in heartbeats, then breaths, then days. 72 hours became a week. A week became 2. Cosmo's organs stabilized, his vitals strengthened. The vet staff stopped using words like critical and started using words like remarkable and miraculous. But Elaine knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was stubbornness. The same stubborn loyalty that had kept him alive for 3 months was carrying him through now. She visited twice a day, every day. Morning and evening, she sat beside his recovery kennel and talked to him. About nothing, about everything. About the plans she was making for when he came home. "I'm fixing the house," she told him on day 9, stroking his head while he rested. "New floors, new paint. And the door. I'm keeping the door open, Cosmo, I promise." His tail thumped weakly against the blanket. On day 14, he ate solid food. Just a few bites of special recovery kibble, but he kept it down. Dr. Chen's smile was genuine for the first time since Elaine had arrived in a panic weeks earlier. "He's going to make it," the vet said. "It'll be a long recovery, and he'll need special care, but he's going to make it." Elaine cried. Again. She'd thought she'd run out of tears, but apparently there was an endless reserve specifically for Cosmo. On day 21, she brought him home. The house looked different. Contractors who worked through the previous 2 weeks, guided by Elaine's very specific instructions. New hardwood floors where Cosmo's paws had scratched and worn. Fresh paint on walls that had witnessed his suffering. The furniture he'd chewed in desperation had been replaced with pieces that somehow felt lighter, less burdened by the past. But the most important change was the front door. It stood open, wide open, a wrought iron security door installed behind it, the kind that let air and light through, but kept the house secure. The wooden door itself was propped back and would stay propped back. Always. Kathleen and Cecilia stood on the porch when Elaine pulled up, Cosmo careful in her arms. He was stronger now, could walk short distances on his own, but she wasn't taking chances. "Welcome home," Kathleen said softly, her eyes bright. The neighborhood had rallied in the quietest, most profound way. No fanfare, no cameras, no dramatic gestures. Just steady, genuine support. Meal trains organized without asking. The lawn is mowed every week by different neighbors. Gift cards left in the mailbox for vet bills and renovations. Someone had planted flowers along the walkway. New ones, bright yellow chrysanthemums that hadn't been there before. Elaine carried Cosmo through the open door, feeling the symbolism of it settle into her bones. This threshold that had represented so much trauma, so much failure, was now something different. An invitation, a promise, a door that would never close again. She set Cosmo down gently in the living room. He stood on shaky legs, looking around at the familiar yet changed space. His nose worked, processing scents, both old and new. Then, slowly, he walked toward his spot beneath the stairs. Elaine's breath caught. That corner where she'd found him, where he'd spent 3 months dying by inches. She'd almost asked the contractors to wall it off, to erase it entirely. But she'd left it. Cleaned it, yes. Made it safe. "But I left it there, because it was his spot, and erasing it wouldn't erase what had happened." Cosmo circled twice, that ancient dog ritual, and settled down with a soft sigh. But he wasn't facing away from the world anymore. His body angled so he could see the open door, see the light spilling through, and see Elaine moving in the kitchen. Not waiting, just resting. Secure in the knowledge that the door would stay open, that she would stay close, that the nightmare was over. The weeks that followed fell into new rhythms. In the mornings, Elaine would wake and walk to the living room to find Cosmo already up, sitting by the open door, watching the neighborhood come to life. Not anxious, not desperate, just peaceful. She'd make coffee, and they'd stand together at the threshold, Cosmo on his side, Elaine on hers, looking out at the same street that had watched everything fall apart and was now watching it slowly rebuild. Kathleen would wave from across the street. Cecilia would nod from her garden. Sometimes neighbors Elaine barely knew would pause in their morning walks to check on Cosmo, to see the dog whose survival had become a quiet legend on their block. His weight returned gradually. The hollow spaces between his ribs filled in. His fur grew back, thick and healthy. The hitch in his back leg remained. Some damage couldn't be fully repaired, but it didn't slow him down as much as it used to. He was different now. They both were. More cautious in some ways. More grateful to others. More aware that everything could disappear in an instant if you weren't vigilant, if you didn't fight for what mattered. But also more present. More intentional. More committed to staying open even when it was scary. 3 months after Cosmo came home, Elaine sat on her porch in the late afternoon sun, watching him explore the front yard. His movements were slow but steady. His tail wagged as he investigated a particularly interesting smell near the mailbox. The door behind her stood open, as it always did now. As it always would. She'd learned something in the darkness of those 3 months, something Cosmo had known all along. Love doesn't close doors. Fear closes doors. Self-protection closes doors. Guilt and shame and the desperate desire to avoid pain. Those things close doors. But love waits in the dark, even when waiting becomes unbearable. Love survives on nothing but loyalty and hope. Love scratches at locked doors until its paws bleed. Because the alternative, giving up, walking away, simply isn't possible. And when love is finally answered, when the door finally opens, it doesn't hold grudges. It doesn't demand explanations or apologies beyond the ones already given. It just steps into the light, tail wagging, ready to begin again. Cosmo wandered back to the porch, climbing the steps with careful determination. He settled at Elaine's feet, resting his head on her shoe, eyes half closed in contentment. The evening breeze carried the scent of Kathleen's roses. Somewhere down the street, children laughed. The world continued its ordinary miracles, its daily resurrections. And in a house that had once been a tomb, a door stayed open, always open. Because love, real, enduring, impossibly stubborn love, doesn't just wait. It opens doors. And once opened, once truly opened, those doors never close again.